We all know and love cables. Cables are what occurs when you lift stitches and change places with them on a knitting machine. It's handled a little bit differently in hand knitting, but the effect is identical. We just have to approach it based on the tools. And cables are present on both of these hats, and I love them. And classic cables are fully covered in this book, mostly classic cables. Let's take another look at these two hats. They are not, in fact, exactly the same. Obviously, the one on the right has a longer brim, but there are other differences. And I'm going to show you how to make both of these hats in separate videos. But today, let's discuss the differences. This is the hat on the left. The knit stitches have been cabled. We're working with a knit 2, purl 2 ribbing, and we've cabled the knit. Turning that hat inside out, it looks like this. This is the hat on the right. The brim was made longer so that we could turn it up. And when we do turn it up, there's still cabling in view. That's because we also worked cables on the purl stitches, which you can see a little bit, but they're not very noticeable if you peer down between the visible cable. Here's the inside of the hat with reversible cables. We're looking at it from the wrong side now, but the cables, because they were worked on both sides of the fabric, may now be flipped out to create a brim that shows cables whichever way you wear it. I'm going to show you how to do that today. Both hats are based on knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. So for both hats, I'm moving 2 stitches to the ribber, alternating with 2 stitches on the main bed as part of the setup. In this case, I do it right after the cast on plus 1 row. That first row forms the stitches that are available for transfer for the setup. In both patterns, there is an extra stitch on each end that will be consumed in the seam. So there will be 3 stitches on one end and 1 on the other end. For the traditional cables, I knit 3 rows between each cable cross, and then cross cables all the way across the main bed. For the reversible cables, I knit 3 rows the first time and then begin crossing cables. The stitches are set up in pairs, so I lift each of the pair on its own single prong transfer tool, place the right stitch on the left needle, the left stitch on the right needle, and repeat all the way across the work. If you are more comfortable cabling so that the left stitch is replaced first, that is fine. But whichever you choose, do it consistently throughout the entire project. For the traditionally cabled hat, you will do exactly what you see me doing now, every 3 rows for however long you want the cabled brim to be. But you're going to do something a little bit different for the reversible cabled hat. For reversible cables, it's best to have the cables occur at increments of even numbers of rows on each bed. So in this case, I'm going to choose 4 rows per bed, but I will knit the first 2 of them and then begin making cables on the ribber bed. This is the exact same operation, but expect to feel clumsy at first. Even though I've done it a good bit, I can't say I'm as good at it as I am the cables on the main bed. But it only feels awkward because we're not familiar with it. You will get better and better, and if I stick with this, so will I. It's just been a couple years since I did it. Now work your cables all the way across the ribber bed. Then we'll knit 2 rows and return to cabling on the knitter bed. And we'll perform those 2 operations alternately for whatever length we want the cabled hem to be. A couple of things to take note of. The cabled hem needs to be a lot longer than usual if you are going to be able to turn up a brim, because you lose length when you turn it up. On the plus side, though, you add a lot of warmth around the ears, and you create a situation where the precise length doesn't have to be determined while you're knitting. The wearer can decide how to wear the hat. This batch of ribber cables are complete. Now knit 2 rows, and I'll cable on the main bed. Of course, because we're using the ribber, we need ribber weights on there for everything except passives. And in all honesty, I think for passives, they actually help too. In the hat videos, I'll give you the exact numbers used to make these two baby hats. The written pattern includes 5 sizes from newborn to adult, and I'm going to add it to this already existing book on reversible cables called Every Which Way Cables. Those who already own the book will get an upgrade, and going forward, everybody who buys it will get the family hat pattern too. And by the way, I'm demonstrating on a bulky, but of course this works on any kind of gauge of machine. And the pattern is going to include 3 gauges suitable for bulky, mid-gauge, or standard gauge, 5 sizes in each one. One final note is about stitch size. Typically, if I were making a hat exactly like the ones pictured, but with only a 2x2 ribbing, no cables, I would go 2, possibly even 3 stitch sizes smaller for the ribbing than I would for the main knitting. And I like to adjust my ribber so that it's making stitches exactly the same size as the main bed, which may or may not be the same number on the dial. For these hats, I'm using Red Heart Soft. It's actually recycled Red Heart Soft because I'm still on a recycling of yarn kick. Knitting at stitch size 6 for the stockinette and 5 for the ribbing. That's only 1 stitch size different on the dial, and I find it works best because ribbing and cables both pull the fabric in. I don't want to overdo it, and I also want the cables to look their best. Always swatch and double check to see what works for you, but that works for me. I recommend seaming hats like this with mattress stitch worked right next to the edge column of stitches, the one I told you was extra and allowed for seaming. If you want to knit a strip of hats of this kind, it's actually very easy to do, and I will show you how in the movies. You're looking at 2 hats knitted one after the other in white yarn with pink yarn in between.